Quick heads up, this story gets graphic and disturbing. Viewer discretion advised.
This case is often described as physically impossible, and when you hear the timeline of events, your hair will stand on end from the absurdity. The husband was hundreds of kilometers away from home, had witnesses and receipts from a hotel, but the police decided that he literally learned to teleport in order to arrange something so terrible that it wouldn't even occur to a completely deranged person. And folks, everything you read in the preview and title is not clickbait. The entire accusation held on one almost invisible stain, the origin of which still causes a fierce war between scientists. And the final fact, which surfaced years later, will force you to doubt, did we imprison a genius devil or an innocent person who was simply appointed to be guilty? And when you find out whose DNA was actually found on the victims, your faith in justice will be shaken. Glad to be with you again. This is Dwight and Abby. Let's not drag this out. Just write, what city are you from? What time is it there right now? What's the weather like? And on which side of the bed do you usually sleep?
August 2000, Palmerston North, New Zealand. If you ever imagine the ideal decoration for a family ideal, this is exactly the place. Quiet, relaxed, soaked in the atmosphere of a small town where neighbors know each other by name and children can safely play on the street until dark. This is exactly where the Lundy family lived. In the eyes of an outside observer, their life looked like a picture from an advertising booklet about a happy childhood. For Mark and Christine Lundy, this place seemed like paradise. But as we know, heavy secrets often hide in paradise corners. Let's look at this couple closer. They were a colorful duo. Mark was a classic big guy, sturdy, tall, with noticeably thinning brown hair that was already starting to give up its position to time. He wore thick glasses that made his gaze a bit comical, but good-natured. Next to him, Christine looked like the complete opposite. Short, with curvy forms and a hairstyle that screamed about the era's short blonde hair with that same blunt, straight bangs. And, of course, glasses. Oh, these glasses? If you lived in the 90s or saw photos from that time, you definitely know what I mean. Huge, square, with clear plastic frames that covered half the face. Back then, it was considered the peak of fashion, although now it looks like a stylistic crime. At that moment, they had been married for 17 years. 17 years! In a world where marriages fall apart over little things, this is a serious term. Their secret? They seemed like ideal puzzle pieces for each other. Best friends, partners, allies. They understood each other without words, almost never argued, which, honestly speaking, always causes me mild suspicion. Is everything really that smooth? Or is it just the calm before the storm? In the center of their universe was one common child, 7-year-old Amber. This girl was like a little angel or a cherub from Renaissance paintings. Round, rosy cheeks, an eternal smile, and a haircut that made her a mini copy of her mom, that same straight bob with bangs. Amber wasn't just cute. She was bright, socially active, and had an iron will. Teachers adored her, calling her a model student. She was an active participant in the Girl Guides organization. This is the New Zealand equivalent of the Girl Scouts. And you know what? Mark and Christine didn't just drive her there. They actively volunteered, helping the group, a real, strong, united team. Wasn't it? But behind the facade of this ideal hidden economic abyss, the couple owned a business manufacturing and selling kitchen sinks. Christine pulled all the administrative routine on herself: papers, bills, calls. Mark was the face of the firm, the salesman who had to push the product. But let's be realists. Selling kitchen sinks? This is a maximally niche and, frankly speaking, difficult business. Think for yourself. We often make impulsive purchases: new clothes, treats, even a new smartphone. But who on earth wakes up in the morning, goes to the store, and thinks, you know what I'm missing for happiness? A new stainless steel sink. This simply doesn't happen. Demand was meager. The business was stalling. By the end of the 90s, the Lundy family debt had crossed a crazy sum over $100,000. This was huge money at that time. The financial noose was tightening, and prospects for rescue through sinks were not visible. Mark, as the head of the family, decided that a radical move was needed. He needed to find a gold mine. In 1999, he went all in. He bought 2 plots of land in Hawke's Bay. This is a region known for its wineries, roughly a 2-hour drive from their home. The idea seemed brilliant on paper. Several of Mark's acquaintances also invested in this land. The plan was simple: grow grapes, sell them to wineries, and rake in money with a shovel. This was supposed to be their ticket to freedom from the debts of the sink business. But life is a cruel scriptwriter. Instead of profits, the land began to suck out the last juices. Mark couldn't make payments for the plots on time. Penalties for delays grew like a snowball. Moreover, they started missing monthly payments for the mortgage of their own house. Financial collapse wasn't just close, it was already knocking at the door. And we all know perfectly well where there are big debts, catastrophe often follows. August 30th, 2000. An ordinary day. Mark was in the city of Petone. This is a typical business trip. He was conducting presentations, trying to somehow reanimate sales of his sinks. For him, this was routine. The road, the hotel, negotiations. Christine and Amber remained at home. Throughout the whole morning, Mark tried to call home. But the landline phone, remember those times before the era of smartphones, was silent. No one picked up the receiver. The scene in the bedroom, honestly, it is difficult to even find words for it. I cannot describe the specific state of the victim due to platform policies. What happened there crossed every imaginable boundary. Glenn did what any of us would do in his place. He called emergency services and in a state of shock sat at the dining table waiting for help. He simply could not look at those rooms anymore. When medics and police arrived, confirming the deaths was just a formality. The house instantly turned into a crime scene. Tape, experts in white suits, camera flashes. The details found by criminalists, shocked, even experienced cops. I am consciously not going to go into the details of what forensic experts found on the furniture, the walls, and even the ceiling. The court documents contain details I cannot share here. But think about the physics of this process. Investigators later said that what had taken place required a level of intensity and persistence that was hard to wrap your head around. According to them, this was not just a momentary outburst. It looked like something carried out with the clear intention of wiping out the life they had built and the identity they had. Despite this tragedy, the rest of the house looked strangely untouched. Yes, Christine's jewelry box was missing. Yes, on one window a latch was clearly damaged and there was a mark. But it did not look like a classic robbery that went wrong. Thieves usually turn everything upside down in search of money. Here, everything was neat, except for the room where the tragedy happened. The nature of the scene suggested that what happened was deeply personal. People who simply want to steal do not usually leave a space looking like this when no one is stopping them. Emotion and anger seemed to be at work here, not greed. Let us return to Mark at the station. After these facts were laid out to him, he was crushed. But an investigation is an investigation. As soon as Mark recovered a bit and could speak coherently, detectives began asking standard but uncomfortable questions. Where were you? What is your relationship with your wife like? Mark laid out his version, and it sounded ideal. Too ideal? He stated that he had an iron alibi. He was in another city, doing business, selling sinks. Regarding the marriage, he painted a picture of absolute ideal. According to him, he and Christine were not just a couple, but a symbiosis. He claimed that their public affection sometimes even annoyed friends and relatives. That is how much they clung to each other. No arguments, no problems. Paradise on earth. But here, Mark made a classic mistake that many people make under pressure. He began to get confused in details, trying to seem holier than he really is. In just a moment, he admitted, well, we have not had intimacy for quite a long time. Stop. Wait a minute. Just now you said that you were inseparable and your relationship caused envy, and now it turns out that the intimate life was at zero. This contradiction instantly alerted the police. Maybe all those public hugs were just theater, a show for friends to hide the coldness in the bedroom. A lack of intimacy does not turn anyone into some sort of monster, of course. But lying about the state of the marriage in the first hours of an investigation is a huge red flag. And here Mark dropped a real bomb. He admitted that on the night of the tragedy, while his wife and daughter were at home, he hired an escort. Her name was Belinda. And this, according to Mark, was not a one-time mistake. He used these services regularly. So much for the perfect family man. His timeline for the evening of August 29th looked like this. He read a book in the hotel, drank half a bottle of rum, a pretty solid dose by the way, and called an escort. Belinda arrived at his room around 11 at night and left closer to 1 in the morning. In the morning, around 8 o'clock, he checked out of the hotel. He claimed he called Christine, left a message, and receiving no answer, simply went to business meetings. Police checked this story, and honestly, it was confirmed. Belinda existed. She was with him. Fate's irony. The only thing saving Mark from immediate arrest was the fact of his marital infidelity. Betrayal gave him the ideal alibi for the time of the likely death. But the police had already latched onto him. Why did he lie about the perfect marriage initially? Detectives wrote it off as shame. It is hard for a man to admit he pays for intimacy because his wife does not want him. That is understandable. But the alibi was so concrete that they had no grounds to detain him as a suspect. He was hundreds of kilometers away. Meanwhile, criminalists continued to take apart the crime scene molecule by molecule. The official conclusion was that some kind of solid household object had been used during the events at the house. The exact item, however, was never recovered.
Whatever it was not found in the house, in the yard, or in nearby bins. Divers even searched the bottom of the local river, but nothing turned up. Whoever was responsible clearly took that object away with them. However, other traces were found. In the hair of both victims, Christine and Amber, experts discovered microscopic specks of paint. It was not just paint, it was a very specific shade. And you know where else they found such paint? On Mark's tools in his shed. Mark had a habit of marking his tools with paint so as not to lose them, or so neighbors would not borrow them forever. A smart move for an owner. But now this habit turned against him. Specks of paint from his tools ended up on his family. This was indirect, but powerful evidence. However, the object itself, the same kind of item that would match this paint, was not found in the shed. Police ended up in a dead end. On one side, a terrible personal case and paint pointing to the husband. On the other side, an ironclad alibi with an escort in another city. They also ruled out one of the more sensational theories that had begun to circulate. Although the way Christine had been found initially raised additional questions, the investigation concluded that there was no separate extra motive connected to that aspect of the scene. Officially, they treated it as part of the overall picture of what had already happened in the house, without any separate focus on that angle. One thing was clear for sure. At this stage, the police did not have enough evidence to put handcuffs on Mark. He remained a free widower mourning, or pretending to mourn, his family. Rumors are a poison that acts slowly but surely. They said he cooperated with the investigation every second, that his alibi was so clean you could admire it. But, as we see in dozens of similar stories, the court of public opinion does not need evidence. Conversations began to spread, quiet, angry whispers that Mark was actually responsible. And this was happening against the background that the police publicly, on cameras, categorically stated, "This is not true, he is clean." But these rumors became louder, more toxic, and finally exploded at the worst possible moment, at the funeral of Christine and little Amber. The farewell ceremony took place on September 7th, 2000, and Mark's behavior that day became a separate topic for discussion, perhaps even hotter than the tragedy itself. He was not just upset, he was emotionally crushed. Throughout the service he cried, and not quietly, hiding his eyes, but very, very loudly, on the verge of hysteria. And when the moment came when everyone had to stand, his body seemed to fail. It was physically difficult for him to get to his feet. When it was all over and he had to walk to the car, it looked like a scene from a movie. He needed the help of family and friends just to move his legs. He literally hung on them. And you know what? People, watching this, split into two irreconcilable camps. Some saw sincere, genuine grief in this. They believed it showed the depth of his loss, how truly devastated he was. And let us be honest, I understand them. I mean, his wife and child were taken from him in a way that is hard to process. I think any of us would lose our minds in such a situation. This is a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. However, others saw a performance. They thought Mark was just playing to the audience, as if his emotions were so excessive, so theatrical, that they seemed fake. An Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, you understand. Some footage of Mark at the funeral, where he sobs and falls off his feet, even started playing on the news, and it worked like gasoline on fire. Many people watching TV were sure Mark is the one who did it, and this despite the fact that the police officially did not even consider him a suspect. The situation heated up so much that the police had to take an unprecedented step to appear on television again, and in a separate announcement emphasize once more, they do not consider Mark a suspect. They explained to the crowd that he was also a victim in this tragedy, that he lost his family. But was this true? Did the cops really think that? Because, if you remember, I mentioned one important detail at the very beginning. Mark called Christine on the morning of August 30th, and it was not her who picked up the phone, but her friend Karen. Karen told Mark that Christine was busy and would call him back later. Sounds mundane, yes, but context changes everything. It turns out Karen planned to see Christine that morning, and she walked into the house at the exact moment Glenn discovered the victims. It was chaos. When Karen answered Mark's call, the police were already there, and it was the police who ordered Karen to lie. They instructed her to tell him in a calm voice that Christine was simply busy.
Think about it. It is unclear why they did this if they considered him a victim. In my opinion, detectives would never force a civilian to lie to the husband of the deceased if suspicion had not crept in. This is not a protocol of care. It is a tactic. They wanted to bring him home and question him in person, looking him in the eye. Perhaps they did not want to give him time to prepare an alibi or a chance to flee. While Mark was driving home, thinking his wife was just busy, the police had already started acting against him. They searched Mark's belongings and found something interesting in his digital footprint. On the night of August 29th, Mark made 2 phone calls. One was at 5:30 in the evening, and the other not until around 8:30 in the evening. But between these points, a black hole. During these 3 hours, Mark's phone was absolutely silent. His location was unknown. The phone was not necessarily turned off, but suddenly, all activity on it ceased. No calls, no messages, not even a quick screen activation to check the time. Nothing. Complete radio silence. And for a person running a business and having a family, This did not match Mark's usual behavior at all. Naturally, for detectives, this looked like a red flag the size of a house, especially when the puzzle began to come together thanks to witnesses. A neighbor of the Lundy family, a woman named Margaret Dance, came forward and stated that she saw something very strange around 7:15 in the evening that same night. She was about to leave the house at 7 o'clock for choir practice, a maximally peaceful activity, but was delayed because friends stopped by to talk for 15 minutes. When Margaret finally went outside to her car, she saw a silhouette. Someone was running down the street. It was a sturdy man dressed in something resembling work overalls. But the strangest thing was not that. This person had curly blonde hair. However, when he ran closer, Margaret realized it looked unnatural. She said it was actually a man in a blonde wig. Imagine this picture. Evening, a quiet street, and a man in a wig and overalls runs past you. He looked upset, scared, and rushed past Margaret without saying a word. And the main thing, despite the ridiculous wig, it seemed to Margaret that the figure and face were very similar to Mark. She could not swear in court that it was him, but the resemblance really stayed in her mind. The police did not stop at witnesses. They turned Mark's car inside out, and they found a jackpot there. A purple dark blue striped polo shirt. It lay in a suitcase, turned inside out. This is suspicious in itself. Who hides a dirty shirt in a suitcase? Mark admitted he wore this shirt on the night of the 29th. But when forensic experts took it under a microscope, they found 2 microscopic stains on it, one on the chest pocket, the other on the left sleeve. The shirt was sent for a DNA test. The result? Expected. Mark's DNA was there. But there was also the DNA of another person, Christine. It would seem, so what? This was not immediately proof of guilt. Mark and Christine were married, lived together. Mark could have gotten her DNA in 1,000 innocent ways. A hug, an accidental touch, sneezing nearby. At least, that is what any lawyer could claim. But there was one detail that gave experts no peace. One of these tiny traces looked different from the others, and specialists could not immediately say what exactly it was. So they called in a highly regarded outside expert, a pathologist from Texas named Dr. Rodney Miller. Because the stains were so small, he had to use a very specialized laboratory method that does not just read DNA, but also helps to understand what kind of body material it might be. According to his testimony, this minuscule trace on Mark's shirt did not look like something that would appear from everyday contact, like a hug or a shared pillow. In simple terms, his conclusion was that the trace pointed directly back to what had happened in the bedroom. For the jury, that sounded devastating. It suggested that this tiny mark on Mark's sleeve made sense only if the person wearing that shirt had been in the middle of those events, not far away in another city. To investigators, this looked less like a coincidence and more like a turning point in the case. But here, critical thinking kicks in. If you, like me, love logic, then you will have a question. This is strange. If Mark really carried out something this extreme himself, why are there only 2 microscopic specks connected to him? The crime scene was, let us just say it was chaotic. Logically assuming, whoever did this should have been covered in evidence from head to toe. 2 small stains the size of a grain of sand. This does not look like the consequences of such an event at all.
This is exactly where the police remembered Margaret's testimony. Their theory came together in a single puzzle. Mark likely put on a protective suit, those same overalls the neighbor spoke about. This explains why his regular clothes remained almost clean, except for an accidental mistake, a microscopic particle that leaked through or got on him while removing the protection. But the question of time remained. Remember the alibi. That night, Mark was in Petone, in a completely different city. The police put forward a theory. Mark could have committed the act exactly during that black window. 3 hours of silence. The timeline looked like this. He called Christine around 5:30 in the evening. They talked for 8 minutes. This is a fact. She told Mark she was taking Amber to dinner at McDonald's. Then comes silence. For 3 hours, Mark's phone is silent. At 8:28 in the evening, it comes alive and he calls his business partner. They calmly discuss business, something about the winery. But a receipt found in the house confirmed Christine's words. She was indeed at McDonald's around 5:45 in the evening. And her mobile record showed another short call to a friend at 7. All this meant one thing. Mark had time. He had a motive. And now, thanks to laboratory testing, they had a microscopic trace that could be linked back to the victim on his sleeve. The noose was tightening. If you believe the timeline, she passed away almost immediately after hanging up the phone. Police latched onto this scenario like a bulldog onto a bone, and forensic evidence, strangely enough, began to confirm this theory with frightening accuracy. During their work, the coroner and other specialists examined internal processes in Christine and Amber. I am not going to go into the specific lab markers or technical medical terms here. There is enough information in open sources if you want to dig into the forensics, and some of it is quite hard to read. What matters for our story is that, based on how far digestion had progressed, the coroner concluded they had died roughly 1 hour after eating, placing the time of death somewhere between 7 in the evening and about 7:15 on August 29th. And you know what? This time perfectly fits into that same black hole, that same 3-hour window when Mark's phone was silent and his location was unknown. Coincidence? Maybe, but there were becoming more and more of such coincidences. The police scenario looked like this. Mark got into the car, rushed back to Palmerston North, committed this terrible act against his wife and daughter, and then just as quickly returned to the other city to secure an alibi. It sounds like an action movie plot, but the evidence hinted at reality. Let us take the gasoline. This would seem like a small thing, but the devil is in the details. Mark filled the car on the 29th. Investigators calculated every liter. His fuel consumption perfectly matched a trip to Palmerston North, a trip back to Petone to spend the night, and finally, the return home the next morning. When he officially returned to Palmerston North, the fuel gauge needle was laying almost at 0. Too low for a person who allegedly made only one trip after refueling. But if you add a secret night raid there, the math adds up perfectly. And what about the broken latch on the window and the missing jewelry box? The police now viewed this as a cheap decoration. Mark, according to their version, staged this scene so everything looked like a robbery that went wrong. A classic of the genre. The logic of the investigators was this. After ending the lives of his own family, he supposedly disposed of the object used in the house, along with those same overalls and the ridiculous blonde wig, probably somewhere on the road, and then returned to his hotel room in Petone. To cement the alibi, he even called an escort late in the evening, a cynical move to have a witness who would confirm he was in the hotel. Then, in the morning, he checked out, playing the role of a concerned husband. But here is one big but. Mark would have had to act at the speed of light. To pull all this off, the road, the crime, the staging, the road back, he had only 3 hours. This is a crazy pace. The trip itself from one city to another takes almost an hour and a half one way, so just the road would have eaten up the lion's share of the time. And he still had to commit the act and clean up. Plus, it was rush hour. He would have had to not just drive fast, but fly, grossly violating all speed limits and risking being stopped by a patrol.
The police were not too lazy to test this in practice. They conducted an investigative experiment. They got into a car and raced. They managed to cover the distance in 1 hour and 33 minutes. They claimed that theoretically it could be done faster if driving like a madman, but even in their tests they could not fit into Mark's ideal schedule. It was on the edge of the possible. And here arises the main question that always hangs in the air. Why? What motive could force a father and husband to do such a thing? The police were sure. Money. Banal. Dirty money. I already said that Mark was drowning in debts. But the situation was more critical than it seemed. Investigators dug up that, on August 28th, just one day before the tragedy, Mark received a happiness letter, an ultimatum. He needed to urgently make a payment for the vineyard land, otherwise he would lose everything. His dream of business hung by a thread. And now add to this another fact that makes my hair stand on end. Just 5 days before Christine passed away, Mark and she signed documents increasing her life insurance, not by 1,000, not by 2, from $200,000 to $500,000. At the same time, Mark did not touch his own policy, only hers. You know, sometimes I adore it when probable criminals do such stupid things because it looks like a signature under a confession. Seriously, if you are planning to remove someone, the first rule of the club, do not change their insurance a week before the event. This is not just a red flag. It is a huge neon billboard with the inscription, "I did it." You are literally asking to be caught. Unless it was just a terrible, incredible coincidence of circumstances. Life sometimes throws such surprises. We will see. The most interesting thing in this financial scheme is that it failed. The big payout would not have arrived because the new policy only came into effect after receiving official papers, which they did not have on hand yet. But the police believed that Mark, in his desperation and haste, simply did not know this. He could have done this in hopes of $500,000 to save his vineyard, and only later realized that he outplayed himself and was left with nothing. In any case, for detectives, the puzzle came together. In February 2001, handcuffs finally clicked on Mark's wrists. He was arrested. The judge denied bail, no freedom. The trial was set for 2002. The prosecution's strategy was simple and, in their own framing, very straightforward. Greed. They claimed Mark ended his wife's life for the insurance. Amber. According to them, she was collateral damage. He did not originally intend for anything to happen to her, the prosecutors claimed, but the child likely woke up and saw what she should never have seen. In their view, he then chose to remove the only witness, Prosecutors painted a picture of that night. Mark speeding from the hotel between 5:30 in the evening and 8:30 in the evening, violating all laws of physics and traffic. He flies into the house, commits the act, stages a robbery, throws away evidence, and returns to play the role of a loving husband. There was one more detail they focused on. Christine was found in a way that seemed unusual for that early in the evening. Usually, she and Amber watched their favorite TV show at 7, and then the little one went to sleep. Christine would not typically already have been fully ready for bed at that time, and that raised extra questions for the investigators. The prosecution offered an explanation that makes one feel a bit uneasy. They claimed that when Mark called her at 5:30 in the evening, he hinted that he would be coming over and that she should get ready to meet him in the bedroom. In their story, this was how they explained why she was relaxed and not expecting any danger. Personally, I find this argument shaky, but that was the narrative they presented to the jury. And here I have to put in my 2 cents. This is a strange argument. Weak. We know that their intimate life was, to put it mildly, non-existent. Mark said so himself. If a husband with whom you have not had intimacy for a long time suddenly calls and tells you to wait in an hour, this would cause not passion, but suspicion. Why on earth, she would think, it would be much more logical to say, I forgot important documents, I will drop by now. But prosecutors insisted on this version because, in their opinion, it best explained why she was found in that state and did not resist at the beginning. Who knows? Maybe in desperation, people believe in a sudden revival of passion. Or perhaps it was just a convenient story for the court.
So, according to the investigation's version, the timeline was strict. Christine passed away almost instantly after she hung up the phone. And here, medical experts enter the scene, and their work was supposed to become the foundation of this accusation. During the formal examination after death, the coroner and his team, again, focused on how recently Christine and Amber had eaten. Without going into formulas or lab chemistry, they concluded that only a short time had passed between the meal and the moment their bodies stopped functioning. In practice, that meant about 1 hour after their last meal, narrowing the time frame to between about 7 in the evening and 7:15 on August 29th. And you know what is most terrifying for the defense? This time perfectly, just with surgical precision, fit into that same black hole in Mark's phone activity. This was that same period of silence which he could not explain. The police theory looked like a thriller movie script. Mark breaks away from his spot in Petone, rushes back to Palmerston North, carries out this calculated act against his wife and daughter, and then returns to secure an alibi. Sounds crazy. The jury listened to the prosecution's arguments. Prosecutors painted a portrait of a greedy monster who ended his wife's life for money and his daughter's as an unwanted witness. Their version: he drove like a madman, committed the act, simulated a robbery, threw away evidence, and returned.
There were also strange details. For example, the computer. Experts discovered that Christine's computer was turned off at 10:52 in the evening on August 29th. At this time, Mark was definitely already in his hotel. This broke the prosecution's theory. But prosecutors wiggled out. They stated that Mark falsified the time on the computer to confuse the tracks. To me, this sounds a bit stretched, like an attempt to fit facts to a ready version. Mark defended himself. He stood before the court and begged them to believe him, claiming he would never do anything to his girls. But after 7 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered the verdict: guilty. Life imprisonment, minimum 17 years without the right to parole. But this was not the end. The defense filed an appeal, hoping for leniency. And you know what happened? It was a complete failure. The appeals court not only rejected the complaint, but increased the minimum term to 20 years. The system seemed to say, you want to argue, get more. But with time, public opinion began to change. People started asking questions. The police timeline was bursting at the seams. How can one drive such a distance, end 2 lives, clean up after oneself, hack a computer and return, and all this in 3 hours? Even Mark's lawyer said, this is physically impossible. Plus, where is the evidence? Where are the clothes that would clearly tie him to the scene? Where is the object used in the house? Where is the wig? Where is the jewelry box? Nothing. Police did not find any obvious biological traces in Mark's car. You end 2 lives with some kind of solid household object, and your car is sterile clean. The only thing they had was those 2 microscopic stains on the shirt. And here we return to science. Dr. Miller's method, which was used to classify that tiny mark, later came under heavy criticism. Other experts argued that the approach was unreliable and that the same microscopic trace could have come from far more ordinary contact, like mucus or saliva, rather than from some uniquely specific source. And the insurance. It turned out Mark wanted to increase his policy too, but he was refused due to health problems. This seriously undermines the theory that he targeted only Christine. The final nail in the coffin of the official version was driven by a 2009 article about the Lundy case, titled something like, What the Jury Did Not Hear. It opened eyes to many things. It turned out that determining the time of death by stomach contents is basically like reading tea leaves. Stress, medication, lifestyle, all this affects digestion. The coroner did not even check body temperatures and rigor mortis. These are basic things, the alphabet of forensics, and they were ignored. And finally, Margaret, our star witness with the wig. The article tore her testimony to shreds. A woman of about 60 years who seriously claimed she was a psychic. She claimed to have photographic memory. Allow me to be a cynic. Photographic memory does not really exist. It is a movie myth. If she had it, she would have accurately described the runner's face. But she herself admitted that everything was blurry. But the funniest thing, if one can laugh here, is her time alibi. She claimed she saw the runner at 7 in the evening after her friends left. But detectives found these friends. They said, "We were at her place at 6 in the evening and left in 10 minutes. How did they know? Because the store they went to closed at 6 in the evening, and surveillance cameras showed the owners locking the doors at about 6:30 in the evening. Meaning, Margaret's friends left an hour before she allegedly saw the person running down the street, a time abyss. This whole house of cards of testimony rested on the words of a woman who believed she saw the future, but could not correctly name the time in the past. The alibi of light. Sounds strange, but it is a fact. Christine was a night owl. She usually did not sleep at this time. Neighbors saw light in the house around 11 in the evening. And, what is even more important, the next morning the light was turned off. Think about this for a second. This is not a small thing. This destroys the entire timeline. If the event happened at 7 in the evening, as the police claimed, then who turned the light on and off late in the evening? Ghosts. Or maybe Mark teleported from the hotel again to flip the switch. The only logical explanation, Christine was alive much longer than the prosecution wanted to admit. And here we return to the computer again. This was the iron nail in the coffin of the police theory. The system recorded a shutdown at about 10:52 in the evening.
This perfectly fit into Christine's routine. She lived by this schedule, surfing the internet, watching TV, doing her things until around 11 or sometimes midnight, and then going to sleep. The computer shutdown time is not just a number, it is proof of her life at that moment. Remember how prosecutors tried to explain this? They turned Mark into a cybercrime genius. They claimed that he, being in a state of emotional shock after what had happened to his family, found the time and, most importantly, the knowledge to get into system settings and tweak the shutdown time to create an alibi for himself. Let us be realists. This is ridiculous. Mark sold sinks, he was not Neo from the Matrix. This is difficult to do even for an experienced hacker, let alone a person whose relationship with technology was on the level of on and off. Nothing in his biography indicated he possessed such skills. But what about damaged files? The prosecution shouted that files were corrupted intentionally to cover tracks. This sounded convincing to the jury who did not understand IT. But when an independent computer technician finally looked into the guts of the machine, he found the real culprit. It was not Mark. It was a virus. A banal computer virus that damaged files on its own. No conspiracy, no hidden sabotage from Mark, just bad antivirus software. This is an example of how simple things can be twisted to look like part of a diabolical plan. Another blow to the prosecution's version, the paint. Remember those stains in Christine and Amber's hair? Police proudly stated it was the same paint that was on Mark's tools, but the 2009 article shattered this myth too. It turned out it was just similar. The police could not even prove it was the same chemical composition or at least the same shade. It is like saying, the person they were looking for had a red car and you have a red car, so it must be you. Without brand analysis, without spectral analysis, just similar color. In a garage full of tools, this proves absolutely nothing. But what makes this story truly dark is that the police had a choice. They had other suspects. Real people who did not even have an alibi that could be checked. But detectives simply brushed them off. Why? Because they latched onto Mark. This is classic tunnel vision. When you decide who is guilty, you stop looking for the truth and start looking for confirmation of your guesses. After the publication of this devastating article, public opinion turned 180 degrees. People began to understand, maybe an innocent man sits behind bars. The situation became so resonant that it turned into a kind of cultural phenomenon, albeit with a taste of dark humor. A group of college students decided to test the theory in practice. They organized a race, trying to recreate that same crazy trip of Mark to Palmerston North and back in 3 hours. They called it Lundy 500. Was it cynical? Yes. Did it cause outrage? Absolutely. The public was shocked by such an attitude towards the tragedy, and the event was canceled. But the very fact of such an idea appearing showed one thing. No one believed in the official version anymore. Students wanted to prove the absurdity of the accusations through the absurdity of action. And on this wave of doubt, Mark's defense went all in. Soon after the article, they filed a new appeal. But not just to a local court. They went to the very top, to the Privy Council in London. For New Zealand, this was the last highest appellate instance, a kind of Supreme Court over Supreme Courts. This was the moment of truth. This was his last chance to clear his name. If the Privy Council said no, the cell doors would close for Mark forever. The stakes were maximal. In 2013, the council agreed to hear his arguments. The Lundy story was far from over.
The Crown have rejected claims by Mark Lundy's defence team that coverage of his behaviour at the funeral of his wife and daughter led jurors to convict him. Lundy wants the Court of Appeal to overturn his convictions for murdering his family in 2000. Ben Irwin has been in court.
The Crown says it's enormously wide of the mark for Mark Lundy's lawyers to claim his dead wife's brain tissue was not on his shirt.
Is that from those two separate?
The brain tissue evidence was a in Mark Lundy's second trial in 2015, when he was again found guilty of the 2000 murder of his wife Christine and daughter Amber in their Palmerston North home. Lundy is not in court to watch the appeal, in which his legal team has attacked, calling it novel, experimental, and labelling Lundy a scientific guinea pig. But Crown lawyer Philip Morgan says multiple experts agree that Morgan also rejecting claims by Lundy's lawyers that images filmed by media of his behaviour at his family's funeral unfairly swayed the jury. He drew attention to other forensic evidence, including paint fragments found in the which matched the paint on Lundy's hand tools.
In Christine Lundy's case, particularly significant is that the paint was actually...
This appeal was scheduled to finish today, but longer than expected submissions from Lundy's team will see it continue through till tomorrow. Ben Irwin, News.
Well, the incredible happened. Mark won the appeal, the verdict was overturned, and he was approved for a full retrial. This was a second chance. And while he waited for this new day in court, something else rare for such serious charges happened. Mark was actually released on bail. He got a whole 18 months of freedom. Members of his family breathed a huge sigh of relief. This was a victory of their faith. They stood behind him like a wall all this time, supporting him every minute of imprisonment. They categorically did not believe that he had anything to do with what had happened to his family.
Lundy's been given a get-out-of-jail card after 12 years behind bars.
He's been freed ahead of his retrial for the murder of his wife and daughter. A judge at the High Court in Wellington this afternoon ruled he should get bail. Simon Bradwell was in court. He joins us now live. Simon.
Good evening. Yes, 12 years Mark Lundy was behind bars. He wasn't even allowed out when his father died. But after a 45-minute hearing today, he's out of jail tonight. Mark Lundy didn't get bail ahead of his first murder trial. This time he has. High Court Judge Ronald Young deciding Mark Lundy can be released from his cell at Rangipo Prison in the central North Island after 12 years behind bars, to the joy of his supporters.
Everyone's really happy about the whole thing. So, yeah, I'm just excited to be able to see him outside of a visiting room. I'll just give him a big hug and, yeah.
Well, we broke the news of the decision to one of Christine Lundy's closest friends.
Oh my God, it's the last thing that we wanted. It really was. Yeah, we're hoping the angels were out there today, you know, helping us.
Rules around bail hearings mean we can only reveal the decision and conditions imposed by the judge. Mark Lundy is bailed to a Taupō address, details of which are suppressed. He must not contact anyone who gave evidence at his first trial, and he must report to police once a week.
I'm not sure it's for me to comment on the conditions, but I can't see anything objectionable in the conditions.
Lundy wasn't present and there was no video link to his jail.
I would hope that he'd be let out straight away, but obviously there's processes that have to be gone through.
Around 30 people sat in the gallery for the hearing. It's unknown if opponents of bail were among them.
Nothing surprises me now. I mean, he's been granted a retrial, and so nothing surprises me now with the justice system.
Today's ruling following the decision by the Privy Council to throw out Mark Lundy's convictions for murdering his wife Christine and daughter Amber 13 years ago.
That the convictions should be quashed and that the appellant should stand trial again on the charges of murder as soon as that can be conveniently arranged.
So, in the spring of 2015, the justice machine started up again. The second trial of Mark began. And here something interesting happened. The prosecution rewrote history. This time they claimed that Mark committed the act early in the morning on August 30th. This was a radical change. They completely threw their previous theory about Mark's hacker skills and changing the computer time into the trash. Did they realize it looked ridiculous? Probably. This was not the only correction. Remember our psychic witness Margaret with the wig? They did not even call her. The prosecution obviously decided her fantasies did more harm than good. But despite these tactical retreats, the main framework of the accusation remained the same. Mark is the one responsible. And what about the defense? The defense went on the offensive with an arsenal we did not see at the first trial. And some facts might make your jaw drop. First, the crime scene. It turns out the police found a whole collection of fingerprints, palm prints, and even shoe prints there that did not belong to Mark. Whose were they? The defense logically suggested the real perpetrators. They also brought friends of the couple who unanimously claimed no tension. Mark and Christine looked like a normal couple in the days before the tragedy. But there was one witness who spoiled this idyll, the cleaning lady. She stated under oath that on the 28th, the tension in the house was so strong that you could almost feel it in the air. She said she was scared even looking at Mark. It sounds convincing, until the defense pulled up her old testimony. In her first statements, given immediately after the events, she spoke about something completely different. She talked about a suspicious white car that slowly drove past the Lundy house on August 28th. She saw 2 men in the front and a woman in the back. This was a concrete, alarming detail. But when lawyers started pressuring her in court, she suddenly forgot. She said it was not important. Changing testimony is always a red flag. Furthermore, Mark's neighbor said that on the night of the tragedy, around 11 in the evening, he saw the alarm light go off in the Lundy house, and at midnight he heard the sound of breaking glass. This perfectly fits the theory of a night intrusion, but absolutely does not fit the police theory about early evening. And now the scariest part. Investigators later noted clear indications that Christine and Amber had not simply stood there and accepted what was happening. It was obvious from the records that there had been direct physical contact and resistance. I am consciously not going to describe what exactly was documented, especially because one of them was a child. The only thing that matters for us is that the official files make it very clear they tried not to give in easily.
But the shock is in something else. When they examined some of the tiny traces collected from the 2 of them, experts found DNA from 2 unknown men. 2 unknown men. This genetic profile did not match Mark, and the police never established whose it was. In addition, Christine was still gripping hair that also did not belong to Mark. For the defense, this looked like direct physical evidence pointing to someone else, while the investigation seemed to look away. The defense did not just defend Mark, they pointed a finger at another suspect, and this was a shock Glenn, Christine's brother. That same Glenn who found them. Why him? First, his call to emergency services. He told the operator that Amber was in a very bad state. The defense reasonably asked, how could he know what exactly was going on with her in that darkness and chaos if he had not been directly involved earlier? Second, when the police arrived, Glenn had a fresh scratch on his nose. His explanation, maybe the cat, I do not remember. It is old. But he himself admitted he likes to pick scabs, so it looked fresh. It sounds like a weak excuse, especially when we know from the records that the victims clearly did not simply stand still. Third, the testing. Police used a chemical spray in Glenn's house and car, and under special lighting, they saw multiple spots react. On the driver's seat, in the trunk, and in different parts of his home, they found biological traces. Laboratory comparisons suggested an 83% match to Christine and 88% to Amber. It was not 100%, but it strongly pointed toward a family connection. Motive. The defense put forward a deeply disturbing version involving Glenn and Amber. According to this theory, certain boundaries that should never be crossed with a child had been crossed. Christine learned about it, and someone decided to silence the situation completely. Another teenage relative also later said that Glenn had crossed lines with them as well, which, in the eyes of the defense, added weight to this picture. But, to be fair, no direct proof was ever produced that something like this had actually happened to Amber. Even today, this remains only an allegation, not an established fact. Because of how sensitive this topic is, I am not going to go into any additional detail. Let us return to Mark and that cursed shirt. The defense attacked the prosecution's main scientific trump card, that tiny mark on the fabric that had previously been described in dramatic terms. It turned out the prosecution had approached many pathologists, and most of them refused to testify, not wanting to attach their reputation to such a controversial conclusion. Only Dr. Miller agreed. Even he, in court, appearing by video, was forced to admit that his laboratory was not certified for forensic expertise. The method he used, IHC, was recognized as flawed for this kind of case. Essentially, he said, well, yes, I messed up. He tried to defend himself by referring to an experiment with material from animal organs on a shirt, claiming that such traces could still be tested a year later, but it sounded more like an attempt to save face than a solid foundation for a conviction. Honestly speaking, one thing amazes me. Why are we hearing about this only now? DNA from unknown men in the traces taken from the two of them. Someone else's hair still in Christine's hand. Traces in the brother's car. These are not small things. These are bombs. Why was this not the central part of the first trial? It looks like a systemic failure. But apparently, for the jury, this was not enough. Or maybe Mark's image was already so demonized in the press. They deliberated for over 15 hours. That is a long time. It means there were doubts. But the verdict remained unchanged. Guilty. Mark heard that word again? Guilty. After the verdict was announced, the victim's family issued a statement in which they likely expressed relief that, in their view, the person they saw as responsible was behind bars again. But questions remain, and they are very uncomfortable.
Welcome the guilty verdict against Mark Lundy for the 30th of August 2000 murders of Christine and Amber Lundy in their home address in Palmerston North. This has been a particularly tumultuous and stressful time for the families of Christine and Amber. This verdict by no way makes up for the loss and the grief and the sorrow, but I hope that at some level the family can gain some closure from this. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Crown and the police investigation team for the last 18 months diligent and committed investigation and preparation for this retrial. The police have reviewed all the evidence, gathered it for court and presented it by way of the Crown for the jury to make their decision today, and we are happy with their decision.
Nearly 15 years later, Mark Lundy was retried for the murder of his wife and daughter, and yesterday was found guilty.
He's guilty, and I think he's exactly where he needs to be, and I hope they throw the key away.
Today at the Karamea Crescent house, there's no obvious sign that a tragedy ever occurred here.
People move in and move out, because I've had neighbours there about 3 or 4 times.
The current owners have told One News that they have been trying to sell this property for the past 6 years, but the publicity surrounding the case has scared off potential buyers. The case that went to trial, the Court of Appeal, the Privy Council and back to the High Court has taken a toll on the victim's family and friends.
He doesn't show any remorse, he doesn't believe that he has done it. So there's no emotion. So yeah, it's just unbelievable.
Christine Lundy's brother, Glenn Wiggery, who gave evidence during the lengthy retrial, described it as a sometimes harrowing 2 months. He praised the original police investigation, saying the verdict backs up everything you did so long ago. Well done, you got it right. He hoped it meant some closure and that the most important people in all of this, Christine and Amber, have justice and can finally rest in peace.
More and more in these cases, defence teams are left with very little but to attack the integrity of the police officers. And the really good thing about this case is that the police officers' integrity was upheld.
After 18 months on bail, Lundy is back behind bars, serving the remaining 8 years of a 2-decade sentence for murder before he'll be eligible for parole. One News understands he's now in Remutaka prison, but Corrections refuses to confirm this. His defence team has a month to decide on whether to make an appeal.
Mark's defense team, you have to give them credit for stubbornness, tried to storm again in 2017. This time, they filed an appeal to the Supreme Court of New Zealand. There is an important legal nuance here that played against them. Previously, historically, the highest instance for New Zealand was the Privy Council in London. This was a legacy of colonial times. But while the Lundy case dragged on, laws changed. The Supreme Court became the final, unappealable instance. This meant Mark got one more chance, but it was a chance of last hope. There was nowhere else to go. Their main argument remained the same, but sounded sharper. The science used to interpret that tiny mark on the shirt was garbage. Methods were flawed, results were unreliable. But the judges remained deaf to this. The verdict was upheld. So, this was the end of the road. Full stop. Mark had no legal bullets left to prove his innocence. The door closed tightly. All that remained for him was to sit in a cell, stare at the wall, and wait for August 2022. That was when, after 2 decades behind bars, he received the ghostly right to parole. His first hearing before the board took place when he had spent about 20 years in prison. This is a huge chunk of life. And if you are sitting now and thinking, well, finally, if there is so little evidence, they will let him out, I have very bad news for you. The system does not work that way. He was refused. And the reason for the refusal is a real bureaucratic absurdity worthy of Franz Kafka. The board was concerned that Mark did not have a rehabilitation plan and a plan to eliminate the causes of the crime. Why did he not? Because Mark was adamant, I did not do this. I have no reasons for the crime because there was no crime on my part. He refused to play this game. How can you correct behavior that supposedly led to something like this if you claim you were never the person who did it? This is a logical dead end. The second hearing took place in May 2023. It was like Groundhog Day. The commission again asked about motivation. Mark again answered, there was no motivation because I was not the person who did this. Result, refusal. But this time the commission added another nail. They stated that Mark clearly had an alcohol problem which he ignored, and that he has no safety plan. Mark, realizing that without compromises he would die in prison, began undergoing treatment for alcoholism. And here is a trap again. If he agreed to treatment, it looks suspicious. Aha, so there was a problem, and you lied. And if he continues to deny guilt, it is interpreted as a lack of responsibility. This is a classic catch-22. The commission puts him before an impossible choice. The only way to get freedom is to lie or tell the truth. If he is guilty, and confess. Invent remorse, explain motives that might not have existed, and promise not to do it again. The question remains open. Was he an innocent man whom the system forces to slander himself for a breath of fresh air? Or was he a cold, calculated person who decided to take his secret to the grave, even at the cost of his own freedom? To this day, a quarter of a century later, society is split. Many point a finger at Glenn, Christine's brother. Others are sure this is the work of a third party. And here details surface that we forgot. For example, the creditor. Apparently, on the day when everything happened, a business partner called Mark. He was in panic. A creditor had just called him and made very direct physical threats. He warned Mark, be careful. This theory sounds like a gangster movie plot, but it has a right to exist. Some people believe the creditor sent so-called torpedoes, rough people to intimidate Mark or pressure him about the debts. They came to the Lundy house, did not find Mark, the situation got out of control, and Christine and Amber became accidental victims. A tragedy by mistake. Police, by the way, did not ignore this completely. They found the person who called with threats. They even took a desperate step, offered immunity in exchange for information. But he disowned any connection to what had happened. There is another shadow figure, a former colleague of Christine. They say they had a serious conflict. This person had an extremely dark past with very serious offenses, and this is not a rumor but a fact. When detectives came to her, she flatly refused to provide a DNA sample. From a legal point of view, this is her right. No warrant, no DNA. But from the point of view of common sense, this looks super suspicious. If you have nothing to hide in a case where two people lost their lives, why not exclude yourself from the list of suspects?
Summarizing this chaos, yes, it seems Mark had a motive: money, insurance, debts. But it also seems the police had a whole bouquet of alternative suspects. Glenn with his strange behavior and those biological traces, mysterious creditors, aggressive colleagues, and simply did not investigate them deeply enough. They chose the easiest path. Is a debt pit enough to force a father to take a tool in hand and do something this extreme to his wife and little daughter? Unfortunately, the history of criminology says yes. Doing something like this to a family member for insurance is a terrible cliche we see again and again. I have lost count of stories on this channel where the motive was exactly this: banal greed. But the sheer intensity of what happened that night looks more like personal hatred or madness than the cold calculation of a failed businessman. What do you think? This is the main question. Is Mark Lundy a genius actor and sociopath who fooled part of the country? Or is he a victim of a judicial error, and the real person responsible, maybe the brother, maybe someone hired, still walks free? Did the police ignore evidence or just filter out noise? This story shows us that the scariest thing is not always the crime itself, but the system that appoints a guilty person instead of seeking the truth. Because when justice chooses the easiest path, real dangerous people can walk among us. And now write to us honestly. Do you believe Mark is a genius sociopath who fooled the laws of physics? Or is he just a convenient victim for the police who needed a quick result? What outraged you more? Dubious scientific evidence with stains on a shirt, or that cops completely ignored the brother with scratches on his face and someone else's biological traces in the car? If you were in Mark's place, would you lie and confess to doing this for the sake of freedom, or stay in prison for your truth to the end? And whose DNA from the girl's hands was it after all? Do you have similar stories? Share them in the comments. Let us talk about this topic together. And if this case made you doubt justice, subscribe now so you do not miss the next story that will shock you even more. May Christine and little Amber rest in peace. In the Gospel of Luke it is said, "For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known and come to light." And this is true. Take this story as a lesson. Never accept the official version at face value and always ask uncomfortable questions, because sometimes justice is just a way to close a case, not find the truth. And now look at the screen. You see the next videos we prepared for you. Believe us, we tried no less there. And if this case touched you, the next one will surpass everything you have seen. So we are not saying goodbye. May the Lord bless you and see you there.